so that you can view the replay if you need to. Slides will be sent to you if you request them. So don't worry if you don't get to catch everything. I can share the slides with you as well. So housekeeping, I think everyone is quite familiar with how to use the chat now. Actually, I'm going to pull up one extra thing so that I can get the Q&A piece as well. Let me see. There we go. Do you see a link to Q&A right now? Or not yet? Might be loading for me. There we go. So yeah, if you have any questions while the presentation goes on, you can open up that link over there and you can type in your questions. And then when we get to the Q&A section, I can just go through all the questions one by one. And yes, so I normally like to do my presentations as an engaging discussion. So if you have any insights of your own, if you have tips and tricks that work for you, do feel free to share. I believe that there is no one size fits all. What works for me might not work for you. So in your case, everyone has a different style for self-management, time management. So if you have other tips and tricks that you've seen work very effectively, feel free to share that with the crowd. Other things to keep in mind, so no bullshit. So please, if you see someone stepping out of line or being disrespectful, feel free to call them out. But at the same time, we want to try to make this a welcoming environment for everyone and as inclusive as possible. So one thing I wanted to do is I wanted to quickly go through donations. So last week, I also had a workshop. And what happened in last week's workshop is we got $50 in donation. Not a lot, but basically what I'm doing is I donate 50% of that to Universal Outreach Foundation. And basically what they do is they fund education to make education accessible in different regions for people who don't have the access to education. So I'm just going to quickly make the donation over here. My wife was asking me, how will people know that you actually donate? So I actually got to show them that I'm actually doing the actions that I say I'm doing. Password. When this happens. There we go. It works. Great. Done. So thank you, Simon, for donating. So jumping into it, my name is Chen. I'm the founder of Classy Novel. Basically, what I do with Classy Novel is it's soft skill training and development. So what I hope to be able to do with everyone is I find that when I went through university, a lot of the skills that I picked up are very hard skills. They don't really teach you things like how to negotiate, how to build your network, how to connect with different people. So I think what I'm trying to do in the work that I do right now is help people get a better sense of what their passions are, and kind of how to navigate some of the softer side of things. Although I think soft skills is kind of a misnomer. It's more a better word I like to use to describe it is essential skills. So these kind of skills are transferable regardless of what you do, whether in professional life or entrepreneurship. I come heavily from a background in entrepreneurship, and I think that's what really motivated me to get into this aspect of personal development. Because when you try to start a business, you end up finding that you're pushing your limits quite a bit and you're really questioning a lot of the actions that you take, a lot of decisions that you make. So I spent the last 5 years working at Spring, which is a social venture incubator here in Vancouver. So I've worked with probably about close to 500 startups, and I've helped them all the way from the idea stage through to the fundraising stage. I'm also trying something new with today's session. So you can use this link, and I'm going to post it in the chat as well, to access shared notes. So this is an experiment we'll try. So anyone can open this up, and if you take interesting notes throughout the sessions, you can type it here, and anyone can see the notes. And I think this is interesting because what I find with presentations or books or podcasts is I can listen to the same podcast a few times, or I can read the book a few times. And every time I read a book or listen to podcasts, I tend to pick up different things depending on where I am in life and what perspective I'm looking at some of the content with. So I like to have everyone, if they can or if they're willing to, take notes all in the shared note document together so that people can see different perspectives and what you're taking away, because perhaps what you might be seeing might be not what someone else is seeing. And sometimes it's just kind of interesting to see what different perspectives there are. So we'll give that a shot. So you can find the link in the chat if you need. So key outcomes today. I'm going to cover 4 main things. So one is talking about and introducing this tool called the focus funnel and how you can use it to multiply your time. We will talk about the Pomodoro technique, of course. So some of you might have heard of it. I will also talk about the Pareto principle. And I'll quickly end up by addressing flow state versus routine. This is a big debate I commonly get. Some of my mentees actually talk about, especially if they're in the creative space, doing their best work when they're in flow. And they're not a big fan of using routine. So I can talk about my perspective on how you can use routine to also kind of enter the flow state more regularly as well. So maybe to kick it off, before we even get into any content, I want all of you to do a quick exercise. So pull out your to-do list. If you have it on a notebook, if you have it in, let's say, Google Keep or Evernote or anything like that, pull out your to-do list. And I want you to try to find 3 things that you can scratch off your to-do list. The other thing I want you to do is, if you look at your calendar, I want you to look at meetings that are scheduled a month from now and see if you can remove all of them or as many of them as possible. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do this, and I want to see how difficult or how easy it is for you. Sure, just quickly to reiterate. So pull out your to-do list, wherever you have it, and try to look at 3 things that you can scratch off your to-do list right away. And when you look at your calendar as well, if you have meetings scheduled a month away from now, basically look at trying to remove as many of them as possible, or remove all of them if you can even do that. And I'm starting here as a baseline because I find that typically a lot of us tend to overcommit to a lot of things that are actually not as important or not as productive as we think it's going to be. All right, I'm going to move on as you guys go through that. So what I generally find is productivity is a nice and interesting topic, because when you really think about it, when you look at what technology has done so far and how it's come, so much has changed. We are pretty much nowadays walking around with mini computers in our pockets. But what we still find is that we still all really struggle with the issue of being productive. So why exactly is that happening now? You're able to communicate instantly. Back in the days when you tried to reach someone, you had to send letters. It took a while, but now you can send emails right away, but you still find that you're not as productive as you think. What is interesting is this presentation is going to kind of cover some of that psychological aspects of it as well. Because when you really think about it, time management, like everyone has the same amount of time. So it's not so much about managing time, it's more about managing yourself and your attention. So if you're curious and interested as well, much of this talk is designed around the presentation that Rory Vaden did in his TED Talk, How to Multiply Your Time. So if you're curious, you can definitely go watch it out on your free time as well. But yeah, we always find that we still don't have enough time, even though we're able to do so much more with the technology that we have today. So really, if you look at it, like I mentioned, everyone has the same amount of time that they have. So the challenge is when you look at a lot of concepts out there, people talk about time management, but really there isn't too much that you can do around the time aspect of it. It's more about when I say self-management, it's more about giving yourself permission to do things that you want to do. And a lot of it is not just logical. A lot of time management is actually emotional. And the reason why it's emotional is because if you think about time management in a logical manner, you find that there's only so much you can do. So I'll actually go through a bit of a history around how time management concepts have evolved over time and why the emotional piece is actually a lot more important than you think it is. So back in the days, when time management theory first came out, the first version was one-dimensional thinking. So you're thinking about being more efficient. So the concept quite logically is that if you do more things more efficiently or more quickly, you get more done in a day, right? So pretty straightforward and pretty obvious. And then time management theory version 2 is two-dimensional thinking. So that's where you start to see these things like the important urgent versus important grid, or it's also known as the Eisenhower matrix. And Stephen Covey was one of the persons who actually introduced this. So you have here, if you're not familiar with this matrix, I'll quickly walk through it because it's still valuable. So there is important, not important, and urgent versus non-urgent. So on the top left, things that are important and urgent. This is the quadrant of necessity, right? So these are things that you have to do right now. And then you can also have things that are really important but not urgent. So these are things that are more long-term. So like goal and planning, personal care, relationship building, things like that. And then of course, you can also have things that are not important but really, really urgent. So for example, let's say you find that, oh, you have an event coming up this weekend, so that it's urgent. There is a deadline that's coming up, but it's actually not that important. So there are more interruptions, so to speak. So like phone calls, emails that pop up, things like that. And then you have the quadrant of waste. So these are more distractions. So these are things that are not important and non-urgent. So that's where you fall into the trap of like, browsing on social media, going on Netflix, playing games, things like that. So we all kind of fall privy to different distractions. But the idea is when you map out the different tasks that you have presented to you, you want to see whether or not it's important, whether or not it's not important, whether or not it's urgent or non-urgent. And of course, the highest priority is top left, the quadrant of necessity. But what happens is when you look at time management V2, time management V1, you're thinking about efficiency. You're trying to do things more quickly. And version 2, you're actually trying to evaluate things on your to-do list to try to prioritize things, right? So you're moving, let's say, item number 7 to item number 1 because it's actually more important or more urgent. But it's no surprise that what you find is if you're doing both of those things, you commonly hear these analogies that people use when they talk about the overwhelming amount of work that they have to do. Like when you say efficiency, people feel like they're just being forced to do more and more things like a hamster on a wheel, trying to go faster and faster. And then prioritization, people always talk about they're juggling many things at once, right? So it's no surprise, we're all kind of like hamsters trying to juggle things, rushing to an impending doom. So the idea here is there is actually one missing piece that is not being considered. So the concept that Rory Vaden introduces is the concept of the multiplier. And the difference between a multiplier is multipliers are people who not only consider importance, urgency, and also efficiency, but they also consider significance. So that's the third dimension. So the significance aspect is how long is whatever I'm going to do going to matter? Is it something that will last a long time, or is it something that will only be temporary in terms of effects, results? So when you think about how you can quote unquote multiply your time, what you're trying to do now is the logical piece falls away and you're actually giving yourself emotional permission to spend times today on things that will create more time tomorrow. So a great example over here is, let's say, for example, one of the things you have to do is you find that every month you have to go online to do a bill payment. Sounds like something that's really small. Maybe it's not very important, neither is it super urgent, but it's something that you still have to do every month. And it's going to take you maybe, let's say, half an hour every month to do your bill payment. And if you decide that you want to automate it, the automation process, maybe it might take you 2 hours to set up. So maybe you might have to go through a certain process to set up some automated tools, put in your credit card information, things like that. And a lot of people might put that off because they feel, oh, it's going to take 2 hours for me to do this. But if you think about it, these are things that will help you create more time in the future, because sure, if you sit down for 2 hours and you automate the process, now when you look at it every month, you're not spending that half an hour anymore. So pretty much over 2 months, is that right? No, sorry, over 4 months, you will have effectively broken even on the 2 hours that you have spent. So anything beyond the 4 months, you're actually multiplying your time now. You're actually having this extra time that you can spend on anything else. So the idea here is you want to be able to think long term, think about the significance of your actions. Make sense? So one process that he introduces is this thing called the focus funnel. So what you do is everything that comes across your table, your plate, when you're looking at the different tasks that you have, the first thing that you want to do is you want to think, do I have to do this? So of course, another great analogy is instead of saying yes to everything, it's come with a default as a no. So when you look at tasks, do I really have to do it? If I don't have to do it, then I will say no to it. If I have to do it, great. Then the second thing is, can I automate it? That doesn't mean that you should automate right away, but you should start thinking about, can I automate it? And the reason why I say don't think about jumping to automation right away is because automation, or if you use tech as an analogy for automation as well, is automation can amplify a lot of things. It can amplify good things, but it can also amplify bad things. So one example is, let's say if you're a salesperson, and let's say if you have this list of clients or customers or prospects that you call, and you find that every 10 customers that you call, you can close 2 customers. And you say, okay, I'm going to automate this process. I'm going to create a bot that will help me build this list. And now I have a list of 1,000 people. And with this 1,000 people, I'll close 200 people. Sounds great. But what you might not realize is if you jump too fast to automation, there might be some other list out there that you can create where the conversion rate is higher. So maybe it's a better target customer. So for example, if you call 10 people instead of closing 2, you might actually close 8 instead of 2. Then you might have jumped too quickly to automation, and automation will actually create a lot of noise. So when you think about automation, you want to make sure that you're creating a lot of the good stuff, not just the noise that you're creating. But yes, start to think about automation as soon as you can. And then delegation is another big piece. So if you can't automate it, then is it possible for you to think about delegating it in some way? And the delegation piece is usually what I find the most challenging for a lot of people. And you probably feel this as well. When it comes to delegating tasks, a lot of us will tend to feel that I don't want to let someone else do it because I feel like they won't do as good of a job as I would. And this logic comes to mind because you're not taking into consideration the significance aspect of it, right? So if you consider significance, over time, whoever you try to delegate this task to will actually eventually get better than you, or at least get to your level, or if not better, right? So if you are comfortable with the concept of letting go, you might be making more mistakes, or the product that you're creating might not be as perfect as it would if you were doing it yourself. But once you delegate, and if the person starts to master the task, then eventually they will possibly even get better than you as well. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to offload as much as you can off your table, and that's what I recommend to do if you're a good leader. And then, of course, if you can't delegate it, then the task will fall on your plate, and you now have to decide, do I need it done now? Is it urgent? Or do I need it done later? And so that's where the concept comes into play, where it's if you need to procrastinate, he calls it procrastinating on purpose. So the reason why procrastination is actually good in certain cases is because when you procrastinate, and I find this myself, especially when I write content as well, you tend to actually, while procrastinating, actually give yourself more room to think about the task and start to plan around it. And it also opens up a lot of room for creativity, and it allows you to incorporate new things that you learn as well. So jumping right into it might not be the right answer depending on the task. So if you have to jump right into it, then the idea is you need to focus right now and you need to concentrate on doing it. If not, then you want to deliberately procrastinate so that you can come back and tackle it when the time is a bit more appropriate. So that's the focus funnel. Maybe I'll quickly pause here and just check for questions. I don't see any questions yet, but anyone have anything that they want to jump in on the chat if they have any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
What do you do if somebody else has delegated something they don't want to do to you?
Something to you. It depends on the situation that you're in. So what I mean by that is your task then is you want to see, is this something that you have to do because that person is telling you to do it and that person is, let's say, more superior than you are? And then is there anyone else that you can delegate it to? And when I say delegate it to, you can also think about external to your organization. So one example is when I was working for Spring, one of the things that I would have to do is I would have to go out and find entrepreneurs to promote our programs to. And because we were a small team, it was just basically Keith, myself, and I didn't really have anyone below me. So what I did is some of the more menial tasks of list building, I ended up outsourcing to a freelancer. So something like that could be delegated. So I was training and working with a freelancer who was based in, I think, Philippines. And I was kind of giving him my process, my tools that I was using, and he ended up doing a really good job in terms of helping me build the list. So that's one idea of how you could possibly approach it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, of course, sometimes things that get delegated to you could also be automated that maybe your manager or the leader in your team might not know about different tools. So there's an option there as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Amin is asking, what's the name of the book that explains the focus funnel? That is actually a TED Talk by Rory Vaden, Roryvaden. And the title of the TED Talk is How to Multiply Your Time. And yes, the slides will be shared, so you can send me an email and I can send you the slides after the presentation is done. Any other questions? Can you share how to establish long-term outsourcing work? Great question. So outsourcing, it kind of depends on the task, but usually what I like to think about when it comes to delegation is a few steps. So number one is when you think about delegation, the first thing that you want to do is, of course, you need to get comfortable with delegating the task. But the second thing is, I don't normally jump to delegating unless I first have a rough sense of at least some of the basics around how to do the task. I don't have to be a pro myself, but I don't generally delegate anything until I at least have a base level knowledge of it so that I can at least evaluate what I deem as kind of baseline performance. And it isn't always the case, but if let's say it's something that you can't directly do yourself, so let's say, for example, you have to do a tech project and maybe you have no background with technology or development, then the idea is you want to look for a mentor or an advisor that has the background experience, can help you find the right person to outsource it to, and then they can evaluate whether or not the job is being done right. So that's the first step, right? Making sure that you have enough knowledge to know what the base level expectation is. The second thing that I find with delegation, it really depends on the task. So there are certain tasks that are more kind of like brain dead work. So these are things that don't really require a lot of creative thinking. They don't really require any sort of like decision making. It's more like really simple tasks, like maybe you just need to build a list, but there's no way to automate some of these things because there are certain things that people have to use judgment for. So machines can't replace everything, basically. So the idea is you want to be able to give really specific instructions so that people kind of know what exactly to go through and what to do if, let's say, this doesn't happen, if that doesn't happen. So one example is when I delegate some of my list building work, one of the things that people have to do is they have to go and visit the company's website. And then I typically ask them to find the CEO of the company. And then if they can't find the CEO of the company, I ask them to try to find the next best person who might be related to fundraising. So this then requires some level of their own judgment where they might say, okay, you know what, I'll look at the CFO, or maybe I'll look at the COO or another co-founder or something like that. If you don't train them on like what to do if they can't find this, then they might just find anyone else in the company and populate the list with that. And you don't want to end up reaching out to, let's say, a customer service person because that person might not be related to fundraising.
Yeah, sorry, like just to follow up to this question, Chen, is like, for example, you mentioned the freelancer in the Philippines. So for me, like now, if I go to Upworks or Fiverr, and then I try to find somebody, but that somebody would be only for a certain specific project. But
Yep.
you mentioned, which is, I think it's a long-term relationship.
Yeah.
So how,
Okay.
so
Yeah.
how do
I
you
mean,
yeah, where do you go to find this long-term?
great question. If it's long term, I don't generally outsource it. If it's long term, I prefer to bring them in house. And the reason why is because normally I find that long-term work, there is a lot more potential for you to actually move people through an organization and help them grow with your organization. And you're also usually looking for people who have better value alignment with your company. So in that case, I think it's a bit better to recruit them if possible, instead of outsourcing. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Have I ever used Fiverr for task completion? I have not. But Fiverr is a lot cheaper than Upwork in most cases, depending on the task. So there are pros and cons. Fiverr, generally, the type of work that you do is more basic work, so like logo design, simple things. If it's more complicated task, or if you're doing more work that requires smart judgment, then usually Upwork you get a bit better freelancers over there. Maybe you could also ask for more time to complete the task. Yeah, definitely depends on the task and what it is. So I think if people are kind of curious on the process on how I kind of evaluate as well, I don't just normally jump to Upwork and say, okay, I'm going to find any random freelancer and hire them. Normally what I will try to do is once I've gone through the process myself, I have a rough expectation. Let's say I might say, yes, Upwork. So let's say I might say, okay, with an hour, I can currently build a list of about 50 people. So this is the expectation I would give to the different freelancers that I recruit. And I normally actually hire a few. So I might hire about 5 different freelancers, give them the project, give them the same instructions, and see how effective they are. So maybe some of them might actually create, let's say, a list of 60 people in an hour. Some of them might create 70 people in an hour. And then you want to also see, of course, sure, they're creating a longer list. Is it better quality as well? Or are they actually just populating a random list and it's a low quality list, right? So you're also A/B testing the different freelancers to make sure that you're finding the best one who can actually do good work and is actually efficient with the work as well. Great. Any other questions? So yeah, Fiverr, Upwork, those are the 2 most popular ones. There are a whole bunch of other ones out there. I'm not too familiar with all of them. But if you want a great sort of master list of resources, give Tim Ferriss's book a read. Tim Ferriss, The 4-Hour Workweek. He actually covers a whole section on just different tools that you can use for automation, outsourcing, things like that. Yeah. Great. So maybe let's revisit the exercise again now. So remember at the start, I actually got everyone to pull out their to-do list and think about 3 things that they can scratch off their to-do list. If you couldn't scratch anything off your to-do list, I want you to think about using the focus funnel now and actually evaluating all of your tasks based on the idea of what can you eliminate, what can you automate, what can you delegate, or what needs to be done now versus later, and try to start by reprioritizing your to-do list and see if you can remove 3 more items, or if you couldn't remove 3 in the beginning, then hopefully now you should be able to at least remove 3 items from the list. So maybe I'll give you 5 minutes just to review your current to-do list and see what you can do with what you've learned so far. Right, maybe one more minute. All right. I'm just quickly looking at the questions that were submitted. So Natalie submitted 2 questions. One was, what is your favorite outsourcing tool or website? I mentioned Upwork is my favorite so far. I haven't actually used Fiverr for many things. I think I've only tried to use it for logo design so far. And I'll actually cover at the end of this presentation some other tools that are not related to just outsourcing, but we will kind of cover that at the end. How do I choose who you delegate to? I think I answered the question by talking about how I usually give the task to a few different freelancers and kind of try to evaluate their performance over a set period of time. What I also do when I delegate the same task to different freelancers is normally I give them different lists to build, so that I don't get just 5 duplicate results with all the same context. So I might tell each of them, okay, this is what I'm trying to do, and I want you to build a list for, let's say, companies that are at this stage, at Series A, for example. So they're raising 2 million. And then for another freelancer, I would say, okay, I want you to build a list for companies that are agri-tech companies, things like that. So I hope that answers the question. Do I mean the book? I would say the list, Christine, for the tools that I was mentioning is in the book, The 4-Hour Workweek. He has a great blog and podcast as well, but they kind of cover all sorts of topics, not just automation and tools. But if you're looking specifically for automation and tools, then in the 4-Hour Workweek, he has a whole section that actually covers a whole bunch of different tools. All right, moving on. Let's kind of talk a bit about some techniques. So now that we have a better sense of how to prioritize our list, and not only prioritize, but also think about things that create more significance in the long term, I want to kind of introduce a few techniques as well, because efficiency still matters in the long run, because having the right mindset and focus will actually help you get things done more quickly as well. So the most obvious one that I use is called the Pomodoro technique. I think in yesterday's workshop, some people who were here, we kind of lightly touched on using this technique as well. So I'm going to go a bit more into details around how to do it if you're not familiar with it. So the first thing to do with the Pomodoro technique is to decide on what tasks you need to have done. And the Pomodoro timer is usually 25 minutes. So what you want to do with it is you set the timer to 25 minutes, you work on the task, and then when the timer rings after the 25 minutes, you put a check marks on a piece of paper. And what happens then is if you have less than 4 check marks, you take a short break. So it's 3 to 5 minutes. And then you go to step 2 and reset the timer again and continue on the task or do whatever next task you have to do. If you have covered 4 Pomodoros, 4 cycles, 4 check marks, then you take a longer break. So you take a 15 to 30 minute rest. And then you reset your check mark count to 0, and then you repeat the cycle again. So that's basically the gist of the framework. And remember, this is a framework just to help give people a sense of having breaks. And I'll talk a bit more about the logic of it in a bit. But the idea is you don't have to be rigid with it. So if you get started with a task and you find that you're really in the flow of things, it is okay to, once the timer goes off, to continue with the task and ignore the timer. And then, of course, when you are ready to take a break, then you can take a break later as well. But why is the Pomodoro technique such a popular technique, and why does it actually work? So number one, having a timer will instill this sense of urgency. And there's this other great TED Talk. Let me see if I find it. I don't remember the title or the name. Let me see. So yeah, Inside the Mind of a Master Procrastinator, Tim Urban. And I will, let me just copy the link and paste it in the chat. So I'll quickly summarize the video so you don't have to go through the whole 30 minutes of it yet. But what he talks about is when people do different tasks, in certain cases, what happens is if you have a deadline in front of you, then you tend to notice that regardless of when the deadline is, most people will tend to procrastinate until the time of the deadline. So for example, if you have to study for a midterm exam, or if you have, let's say, a project due, most people wait till the final hour to actually get everything done. And this deadline is there. And what happens is people naturally will distract themselves with smaller tasks. So the idea is for bigger things in life where there aren't deadlines, then it becomes a lot more challenging because then you end up procrastinating indefinitely. Because what happens is you don't have the deadline, so you just don't get to that final hour, and then you don't actually get started with anything, right? So the concept of having this timer or setting a deadline for yourself, it really gives you the feel that you don't have an indefinite amount of time. So you don't feel like, you can just distract yourself on other things. So the idea is you get started, you know that you have a fixed 25 minutes and you need to get something done in the 25 minutes or as much of it done as possible. It kind of drives this sense of urgency. And then the forced breaks, that also really helps with combating burnout. So the idea is during your breaks, you want to make sure that you're, drinking some water, stretching, resting your eyes, moving around. So all these kind of things just really help avoid the burnout piece. And then the piece where he took the check marks, that kind of gives you the sense of actually accomplishing something as well. So it kind of builds momentum for you. So that's why the technique is so effective. And the other thing I want to get you to think about is when you think about doing tasks as well, another concept I want to introduce, which is slightly related but not entirely similar to Pomodoro technique, is the concept of diminishing marginal returns. So if you're not familiar with this concept, on a very high level, the idea is when you do something, if you keep persisting at doing something over a period of time, it doesn't mean that you become more and more effective at it. So this applies to not only time, but also resources that you put towards whatever project. So for example, you might say, okay, if I have a kitchen, or if you have a food truck, and if you have one chef working in your kitchen, you might be able to produce a 1-to-1 ratio of output. If you have 2 chefs, maybe whatever you can create is doubled. But if you have 30 chefs in your kitchen, having too many people doesn't mean that you can actually create that much more food coming out the other end, right? So over a period of time, usually your returns will eventually diminish. So the idea is you want to make sure that you're pacing yourself as well so that you can actually switch so that you don't get into that burnout mode. Regarding tasks specifically, where you see this applying most often is where, let's say someone has to study for an exam or if they need to work on a project. So if you work on one single project for 12 hours, for example, and you try to burn the midnight oil, it doesn't mean that the quality of your project is going to be really, really great. So you want to make sure that you take the time to rest and really regenerate your attention and energy as well. So what I do with the Pomodoro technique is I use it on a daily basis when I'm working on specific projects, right? So it's not so much on looking at the to-do list and managing it, but once I already know what to do and I have already planned out my day, when I'm actually starting to do all the different things, then I set my Pomodoro timer and I actually get through it. Any questions on Pomodoro? All right, if not, I'm going to jump to the next one. Another one of my favorites is the Pareto principle. So what I normally do when I think about it is when I look at different things that I have to do, I want to evaluate the 80-20 rule. So that's basically what the Pareto principle is. So on a very high level, It's also known as the law of vital few. So usually the concept of Pareto is there are many things that we have to do where only about, let's say, 20% of what we do tends to give us 80% of the results. And on the other hand, there are certain things that we spend about 80% of our time on that give us really marginal results, only about 20% of the results. So for example, let's say if you run a company, you might notice that 80% of the revenue for an entire company usually comes from 20% of their biggest clients. Or for example, you might say, let's say if you're in customer service, you might find that 80% of your time is spent dealt with challenging clients that only contribute towards 20% of your revenue. And there are many, many other different examples of how the prior principle comes into play in daily life. But the idea is you want to focus on things that are most important, things that are most impactful, and minimize your time on all the other things. So especially when I work with entrepreneurs, one of the common ways I normally see this manifesting is entrepreneurs will really spend a lot of time on financial modeling, on logo design, on branding, and all of these things are really marginal in terms of the value, right? So for example, what they should be focusing on instead is they should be focusing more on their customers, on getting sales. Those are the things that you might spend a lot less time on, but actually might give you a lot more results. Do I have a way of evaluating to create the 20%? I don't have an easy answer to that. I think it's really about being mindful of things that you're doing and reevaluating them on a constant basis, instead of just letting yourself kind of go with the flow. So I don't have an easy answer, but usually it's just taking a step back, taking some time to think about like, hey, is what I'm doing really that important? Is it actually giving me as much results as I think it will be giving me? And also, of course, not only remembering about the importance and urgency of the thing, but also thinking about the significance. So in certain cases, for example, branding, I mentioned, is something that a lot of people spend a lot of time on and it gives you very marginal results, but there comes a time when branding is important, right? If you're a larger company, if you've started to build a bigger reputation, more customers, then branding becomes important because you're thinking about the significance aspect of the calculation then. So I don't think I have an easy answer for that. So I think I went through some of the examples, so maybe I don't have to cover them again. So what I want you to do then is just take some time to do some reflection now. Maybe we'll spend about 2 minutes here. What I want you to do is I want you to look at what you're currently doing, and you don't have to look at what the results are. So you don't have to try to evaluate what the output is yet, but just look at what you're spending your time on right now. What is your 80%? What are things that take up 80% of your time? What are things that you find that you're spending maybe even too much time on? So are you spending a lot of time on email? Are you spending a lot of time on data entry, analysis? If you're running a business, are there certain projects or certain customers that you spend a lot of time with? Are you doing a lot of sales, a lot of marketing, a lot of development? So I just want you to evaluate and look at what is your 80%. Definitely a great suggestion, Natalie. So she was saying in the chat, one exercise or one suggestion that she has is to spend less time in emails is to actually just pick up the phone and do a call instead. So normally I do the same thing as well. If I'm writing an email and I find like, oh, I'm taking too much time trying to craft the right message, or it's a bit too complicated to explain, then I just jump on a call. Another thing I've learned in the consulting world as well, is generally you never want to deliver bad news through an email. So if there's something, let's say a delay with the project or something came up that was unexpected, you always want to do that through at least a call or an in-person meeting rather than doing an email. How am I annotating the slides? Cool. I totally forgot to do that before, but Google Slides actually has a captions function. So it's a part of the Google presentation piece, and you can just turn on the captions and it automatically listens for what you're saying. All right, maybe let's quickly move on. So the next piece of this exercise is maybe another 1 or 2 minutes. I want you to look at, so now you're not looking at the actions, you're looking more at the results side of things. I want you to look at what is your 20%. So what are the things, what are the things that give you the biggest results or returns? So if you're running a business, what are your most profitable products or services? Which customers give you the largest returns? Or even if you're not doing a business, are there certain activities that you do that you find give you the best in terms of output? So biggest breakthroughs that you have, what gives you more fulfillment? What do you actually feel most productive doing? So start to think about what gives you the biggest bang for your buck, and then see if that's maybe your 20% that you can spend a bit more time on. And Lindsay is mentioning in a chat, email is, she finds that email is better than a phone in some cases, less time to send an email than a phone call. Yeah, I think it kind of depends on what the topic or what you're trying to accomplish in certain cases. So I'd say use your discretion. In my case, I'm more of an introvert, so I personally prefer to send emails myself rather than doing a phone call. But in certain cases, definitely a phone call is a bit more effective. And it's just really challenging myself to actually get over that fear of picking up the phone and speaking to someone. Yeah. Oh, one other quick interesting thought that just occurred to me. Sorry, I'm interrupting you all during the exercise. But on the email piece, one of the things that I learned in negotiation is emails are good in certain cases if there is a difference in power dynamics. So for example, if you're trying to reach out to, let's say, a CEO of another company, in certain cases, when you're trying to negotiate a contract or try to get something done, let's say maybe even get hired by the company, if there is too big of a power difference, sometimes some difference will help make up for that power difference. Because if you meet up in person or even jump on a call and there is a big power dynamics in play, then usually what happens is you might get in your own way because you doubt yourself or you feel that you're in a lower position of power, and then you end up tripping over yourself. So in certain cases, depending on your style, your personality, having the time to really think of what you want to write and put that into text can also help as well. Great. I think I'm going to move on. Again, remember, if you don't have time to go through all of these exercises in detail, you can rewatch the video or go through the slides and do it at your own time as well. So how to use it. So I talked about the Pareto principle. What I basically do this is Pomodoro, I use it on a daily basis. Pareto, I normally do it usually on a monthly or quarterly basis. And what I do is it just helps me refocus and ensure that I'm actually not spinning my wheels on things that don't give me a lot of results and just really focus on things that give me better results. So that's something I do on a, once a month or once a quarter type of basis, depending on what I'm evaluating. So distractions, so let's kind of quickly talk about this because I think self-discipline is, and I will confess, it's something that I struggle with in certain cases as well. And I don't think I'm perfect. So at the end of the day, I just want to try to share some general tips and tricks I've learned over a few years, and hopefully it will help you out as well. So usually what happens in the distraction wall is you're kind of torn between this never-ending battle within yourself on that grit aspect of things. So the long-term effects, the goals that you have, and sort of your passion for it, versus the things that give you immediate gratification, right? Things that give you sort of pleasure that happens right away. So what happens in those kind of cases is you end up usually carving into sort of those instant gratification pieces. So, internet's a big one, going on social media, definitely. So Christine talking about removing all social media notifications. So that's a great way of doing it. Normally what you usually see is the phone is the biggest one right now. So I talked about how we all have like microcomputers in our pockets nowadays. And it's really started to affect a lot of people. So the obvious ones is people are starting to even have there's a term for it, nomophobia, where people are afraid of being without their phones, right? There are people who constantly check their phones even though there are no alerts. And the stats, I can actually send you the link for all this research as well, is office employees actually check their email up to 40 times an hour in some cases. So phones, emails, all these small distractions. And then of course you even see that manifesting in many, many other more dangerous ways. So people using their phones while driving, people who have to bring their phones to sleep, using their phones in the middle of the night when they're out at dinner. It is becoming a really, really big distraction. So when you think about it, it's not just the smartphone. Your smartphone is just one manifestation of all this instant gratification pieces. It has made it easier for you to be distracted, but there are a lot of other things that happen that help you, that sort of not help you, but pull you away from sort of your main things that you need to do. And this not just happens in the micro moments on the, like, let's say minute to minute or hour to hour basis, but even on a daily basis. So let's say, for example, you have a big project to do, and let's say, or even an exam if you're a student, you tend to end up distracting yourself with a lot of other things, like hanging out with friends, going out to different places. Someone might give you a call, chatting on the phone. So many, many different ways of doing it. So the high level concept that I want to introduce is big rocks, and I'll quickly play this video. It's a short video. Let me just make sure that my sound is on.
Your name is?
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth. You have a work life?
I do.
Family life as well?
Mm-hmm.
Children?
Not yet.
Not yet. What's the nature of your work assignment?
I direct an international firm.
An international firm? Mm-hmm. So you really are interfacing with all kinds of people in the firm and outside the firm.
That's right.
You want a rich personal life and a rich family life. Do you ever feel like you get bogged down in the thick of thin things?
Yes.
Well, that might be analogous to all these little, small things that tend to fill our life. And that just little by little, they just accumulate. Now, your job, you can't go above this, is to get all those large rocks in the jar. Good luck. What's that one called?
Q2, planning, preparation.
Right. Planning, preparation, prevention, and empowerment. Mm-hmm. Okay, the next rock she's putting in there is called relationships and family. You didn't look at that third rock you put in there. That's employment, some key employment issue, and then you put major projects here. I can't get it above there.
I haven't worked it yet.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. That's called Service Community Church. Do you ever feel like this?
Yes.
How many feel like this? By moving the little things around, you might squeeze in one more of those big major things. It's almost. Wow, that is good. You know, if it doesn't fit, force it. Here's something that's called urgent and important. It's a quadrant 1 thing that is blindsiding you, that it's your biggest client, that if you don't get back to that client now, you've given up your vacation. And you have no special block of time just for yourself. I'll tell you what you can do if you want to.
What's that?
You can take a whole different approach. You have a totally fresh bowl. You can work out of a different paradigm altogether.
Well, then I'd rather put these in the bottom and then pour the little pebbles on top.
Employment,
Big opportunity,
big opportunity.
important and urgent, block of time. Those young children keep looking at me. Glad my husband's not here. Now I dump these in there.
Okay?
All right. I think the video might be a bit laggy on your end, but I think the audio should be good enough. So I think the concept is pretty straightforward, and really the idea here is it's super, super simple, but people often overlook the idea of putting the big rocks first, and that really builds into a lot of the analogies that you hear where people talk about things like eating the frog first thing in the morning, or big rocks first, obviously. So the idea is get to your biggest task first, so that you don't get all the distractions pushing you out of the way, right? So just making sure that you actually start your day on a daily basis by tackling the top 3 things that you really need to do, and then everything else will kind of fall into place around it. Because if you don't, then you will find that you will procrastinate and you'll put off those big 3 things, and you will always find other things to do. You will always be busy for the sake of being busy. So just be careful of that. So the last thing I want to touch on is the concept of structure versus flow. And I had this big debate with one of my mentees recently, because he is in the realm of the creative space. So he runs this blog called Site2Go, and they put out a lot of content. They have over 1 million monthly visitors, and he finds that his most creative time is usually in the wee hours of the morning. So he will tend to work really odd hours, sometimes going to bed at like 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning, sleeping throughout the day, and it's not always the same. His schedule is always different. So he always talks about, I find that I do my best writing when I'm in the flow, but he really struggles with getting into the flow, right? One of his biggest challenges is sometimes he will go for even weeks at a time where he has what we call writer's block, and he just loses motivation and he can't really pick up the pen and start to write good content. So what I personally think, and this is my opinion, so if you guys have other perspectives on this, feel free to challenge me as well. I find that structure and routine helps. And the reason why I think it helps a lot is because having structure and having routine will help put you into the flow more easily, because you start to prime yourself to get into the flow at specific times. So one example of that is when you say, let's say you find that you write best in the evenings. Fine, then you can build your structure and routine around evening time being your writing time. But if you know that every day at say 10 p.m. at night, that's when you're going to, turn off all your notifications and just sit down and start to create content. Maybe at the start, you might have that writer's block, but eventually once you get into the flow of it, once you get used to the routine, when 10 p.m. comes around, you will find that you will naturally click into that flow state more easily. So the idea is if you start to build that routine, it helps flow state come up more easily. The other thing when it comes to kind of entering the flow state, I find is people tend to have what we call decision fatigue. And this concept is basically the idea is every day you're making a lot of decisions. Small things like, deciding where you want to eat, what you should dress, whether or not you're going to do small things like go pick up the groceries or, send your spouse to do it or something like that. The idea is all these small things tend to add up over time, which is why you see a lot of big reputable people like, let's say, Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg. You see that they even eliminate some of the smallest decisions in their life, and they always wear the same thing every day to work, because all these kind of small decisions tend to eat away at you. So the idea is if you can automate or create a schedule around all these things so you don't have to think about them and you just do it when it comes up, then it helps take away some of the decision fatigue as well. So creating a routine or schedule, I find it personally helps me a lot. I can quickly show you what my calendar looks like. And I actually just did it today as well. So I think Dakota was sharing, she says she agrees. She was glad to be able to establish her routines during COVID times and schedule off the events into electronic paper calendars. So definitely agree. So one of the things that I found myself falling into is the last few weeks, because everything has really been thrown off balance by the kind of the new flow. It's really affected my productivity. So even this yesterday's session where we talked about mindfulness and energy, it really got me thinking into like, I just need to sit down and do my batching again. So what I've done here is I've actually put in my calendar different things so I don't have to think. And even the small things like, dropping off my kid at daycare, when I should cook. And I actually have a different sheet, but I'm not going to show you that. I actually have a meal plan sheet. So every day I don't have to think about what to cook. I open it up and I know, okay, tomorrow I need to defrost a fish because I'm going to cook fish. Then I can just spend a bit more time around the creative aspect of it. I can think of like, how do I want to cook a fish? But I don't need to think like, okay, what should I cook? What should I make for lunch today? What should I make for dinner today? So small things like that, where I can try to, as much as possible, do some upfront planning, so that when the time comes, I don't actually have to, fatigue and tire myself out by thinking about the different things that I have to do. Do I use Trello? I actually use a similar tool to Trello. It's called Asana. Very similar to Trello in terms of functionality. I find Asana is just a bit better because of the added amount of features. But there are a whole bunch of different ones for project management. So Trello, Asana, Basecamp. Yeah. One thing that I try to do with scheduling as well is I do batching. So if you're not familiar with batching, the concept is when it comes to doing tasks, you want to try to avoid multitasking as much as possible. Because what happens is, although we think we are able to do many things at the same time, multitasking is actually us rapidly switching when you're doing one task to another. So you're not actually focusing on doing, let's say, 5 things at the same time. You're doing 5 different things one at a time, and you're switching from one thing to the other. So the idea is when you switch tasks, the challenge with multitasking is it takes you a while to kick into gear when you're working on your next task. So the idea behind batching is you want to try to schedule similar tasks together so that it doesn't take you that much effort to switch your gears. So for example, one of the things that I noticed is what I would try to do in batching is I will try to schedule all of my meetings on the same day. So if I have to do external meetings, meet with people, go on Zoom calls, phone calls, I try to do it all in the same day, because what I find is when I do it in different days, when I try to put in work in between meetings, it really distracts me, because sometimes like when I know a meeting's coming up in half an hour, I'm like, half an hour, I don't have a lot of time to do like a big project, maybe I'll just check my emails. And then I find that I'm not as productive. So what I tend to do then is I just book all my meetings all in one day, and then I get through all of that. And then, when I have to work on another project, I'll just focus on that. How about Slack? So Armin is asking. Slack, I definitely use it for team communication. But most of my work is usually done on my own. I do have some projects where I'm working with a team, so I definitely use Slack for that. Christine is asking, how is this different from men and women? So people say that women are better at multitasking, but again, when you really look at multitasking, in most cases, you are usually switching tasks. You're not actually doing multiple things at the same time. In certain cases, when you are, so let's say an example is when I cook, I listen to podcasts at the same time. So you might argue that that is multitasking, but if you think about it, I'm on autopilot for one of my functions. So for example, when I'm cooking and listening to podcasts, I might be really on autopilot for the podcast or on the cooking, because I already know what recipe I'm using, I already know how to cook it, so I'm really just paying more attention to the podcast. So then at the same time, when you actually have to focus on certain things where you're like, okay, how exactly do I do this again? Or maybe you've forgotten a recipe or you forgot how to do something, you might notice that you tend to miss out on certain things that happen in the podcast and you need to go and listen again. So usually, unless it's an automated behavior because you've already built up a routine to it, then you're actually switching between one task or another, and you're not actually doing what you really think is multitasking. Does it not depend what multitasking? Yeah. So I think, yeah. So Dakota same comment there. So definitely, if it's something that is really automated, then it's fine to do that type of multitasking. Cool. So that's the piece on batching. Turning off alerts and notifications are obviously just putting your phone away. And yeah, I try not to, especially in these times, just not check news too often because it does pull me into that negative spiral. So only checking it once in a while just to make sure I'm up to date on certain things, but I don't check it every single day, every single hour. So just some quick things and then we can wrap it up. Just be careful about being busy, right? Some people tend to find that they're always busy or always comment to other people saying that, yeah, I'm busy, I can't do anything. Being busy could be a symptom of a bigger problem, right? Being busy might just be a symptom of being lazy, because when you are doing a lot of things, you're doing a lot of easy things and you're not really focusing on what is really the most important thing. You might also be obviously avoiding confrontation, of avoiding difficult decisions and just keeping yourself busy with all the small, unimportant things. Or maybe even being ineffective or, low inefficiency, low output, low outcome. So just be careful about like, are you really that busy, or are you working on the right things at the right time? Yeah, I mentioned the multitasking piece. Busy people multitask, productive people do one thing at a time. So I can probably dig up the research on that if you want more actual detail for the research. Step by step. So yeah, just focus one thing at a time. I think Natalie asked this question yesterday on what about some of the bigger daunting tasks, big projects. So what I try to do is, break the big goals into smaller goals and just focus on getting started. Like the biggest hurdle I find for myself is that first step. Once I take that first step, I find that I get into the flow a lot more easily. So just getting into taking that first step and getting things done and doing one thing at a time, right? Focusing on what's the next thing that you have to do, and instead of over planning in certain cases. No, Christina, I have not gone through the tools yet. And I think they're coming up soon. One thing I find on the goal setting piece, because it's related to productivity as well, is really just making your goals public, getting someone to hold you accountable to it. One of the things that I used to be doing it, and I actually have not been doing it in the last few years. I used to have this friend, he's still a friend, I'm not used to have this friend. So Steven, a good friend of mine, he used to be my accountability buddy. So we would actually call each other every single day at 7 a.m. in the morning, and we would actually set goals for the day, and we would actually, follow up on what actually happened for the previous day. Did you hit your goals? And we would actually have different like punishments even. So if you don't hit your goals, then we would, set out like what might be the punishment. We might say, oh, maybe you have to buy me lunch the next week, or some other thing like that. And the idea is when you actually have someone to hold you accountable, your rate of success for your goals actually soars a lot more, actually goes up a lot higher. So we ended up stopping that primarily because at the time we were both doing it when we were both unemployed and we were both looking to start businesses or get a job. So we actually got to a stage where we very quickly found mentors and just got overwhelmed with our work and we stopped doing this practice. But I am looking for a new accountability buddy right now. So if anyone wants to partner up and experiment this with me, definitely welcome to it. Or if people want to do it with each other, I strongly recommend it. I found that I've been my most productive during these times. Christine mentioned I do like random days with friends, get it done days, definitely. So kind of in certain places you even see like kind of collaborative co-working days where people like sit together and just get shit done. So yeah, like just having some people to hold you accountable really helps. If you are considering finding an accountability buddy, some of my suggestions on what I find works is you want to at least touch base once a week, or even if possible, maybe every single day if you're open to that. You want to also share roadblocks and challenges and give each other feedback. So it's not just about what you did and what you couldn't do. And you want to make sure that you're actually open to asking help when you actually need it. And I mentioned the punishment piece. It has to, in some way, motivate you to actually do it. So it has to hurt. And you have to be able to really trust each other as well. Yeah. So maybe I'm going to skip over this exercise, but think about what your key focus areas are and who you can have hold you accountable. If you are struggling to find an accountability buddy, I am actually doing this as a volunteer activity right now. And I'll talk about it at the end, but basically I'm putting together a accountability sort of mastermind or group. And the idea is what I'm noticing is because even I myself, I'm starting to build a lot of bad habits over this work from home situation. And I'm trying to kind of readjust myself so that I start to become a bit more productive again and build better habits over this few days. And what I'm doing is I'm creating this group where collectively as a group, we can hold each other accountable. So if you're looking for a bit of that and you find that, just having someone actually push you to actually do the right things kind of helps, then you're definitely welcome to check in with me and I can give you more details on that. So to wrap it up, a lot of content. So key takeaways, what can you eliminate, automate, or delegate? Second thing is focus on your best 20, Pareto principle, remember. Focus on your big rocks first. So get the big, most important things done first every single day. If you can, try to use routine to get into flow and use an accountability buddy if you have. So that is basically it for the presentation. I'm going to quickly look at questions, but this is kind of the time for Q&A. Feel free to type questions out and I will check it out in the chat, or you can also use that link above and I will keep an eye on it. But while we're waiting on questions, some upcoming workshops that we have coming up. Next week, we are talking about startup basics. So if you are running or thinking of starting a business, then we'll talk about some common mistakes, things to avoid, how to validate your ideas, things like that. May 20th is a fun one as well, how to write emails that people will respond to. This applies not only to entrepreneurs. So if you're looking to find a mentor, if you're looking to find an investor, if you're in sales, if you're in marketing, it's kind of talking about a bit about copywriting, but more on email etiquette, how to actually get good conversion rates on your email, how to get people to actually want to reply to you. May 27, better storytelling. So we'll talk a bit about some storytelling frameworks, how to build rapport, how to be more relatable. June 3rd, building confidence and overcoming the imposter syndrome, and then June 9th, pitching for hackathons. So full details on the link, and I can send you that in the email after the session as well. If you are, sorry, I'm going to read some of the questions. So few people are interested in accountability group. So yes, I will definitely send you the details. I think I'm going to have your email because you registered through Eventbrite. Connie, I'm not sure if you registered through Eventbrite, but just shoot me an email and I can definitely send you the details. Yeah, and any of any of the workshops, if you miss any of them because you can't make the dates, then most of them should be recorded. Just send me an email and I can definitely send the replay as well. My email, yes. My email is chin@classynowall.com, and you'll see it in the last slide as well. So one quick announcement I want to make is I'm also running this hackathon or challenge. So if you have some idea for a business or solution or startup that can help make the world a better place, especially in this current situation, this challenge is a 30-day challenge. It's kind of not only a competition, not only a hackathon, it's more like an incubation program. And it's not only for tech companies. So if you have any idea that is not tech related as well, what you can do in this challenge is you pitch your idea, you find team members, and then you can go out and validate your idea and really see if it makes sense to start a company out of this or build a solution for it. And then at the end of the competition, you'll actually stand a chance to win some prize money and some in-kind services as well, depending on what place you come in. So there's more details on that. I can send that out as well. And yeah, the last piece is all the events are free. So I like to keep my events free as long as possible. But yeah, if you really enjoyed it, then I welcome that you tip. And 50% of the tip will go towards the Universal Outreach Foundation, as you saw at the start. And it provides quality educational opportunities to students of all ages. So yeah, that is pretty much it for the presentation. So that's my details. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you want the slides and recording, just shoot me an email. Let me see questions. Yeah, not a problem. Sorry, I'm just writing some notes for people who want details on the accountability group. Other books to read that I can recommend, these two are great books as well. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, tools. Oh, this is just more bonus content. So Christine was asking tools. So Trello, I mentioned, you mentioned. Asana is what I use. Basecamp is another similar one. Toggle is one of my favorite tools right now. So Toggle is a time tracking tool. Toggle also has a Pomodoro feature for it. So I can probably show you what Toggle looks like. And there is a Chrome plugin, and there's also a mobile app for Toggle. So what you have is you just basically put in what your task is, you hit play. I actually need to adjust this because this was something I was doing early in the afternoon and I forgot to pause it. But it will also set off an alarm if you have the Pomodoro timer set up, and it will just remind you to take a break after 25 minutes. Admin is asking, sorry, I'm not sure who admin is. What are your thoughts on time spent on tasks versus productivity? Why 4-day work weeks are more productive than 5-day ones? The idea behind like condensing the time is, like I mentioned, normally when you give yourself a longer deadline, you tend to end up procrastinating more. You tend to end up filling that gap with more distractions. So just having a tighter deadline tends to create more urgency and actually gets people started more quickly. The biggest piece is really getting started. Once you get started, you tend to really fall into flow a lot more easily. So normally, like if you say that the project, if you give someone a project and you give them a deadline that is a month away, or you give them the same project and you give them a deadline that's a week away, you'll find that most people can still do it within a week. It might be a little bit more stressful in certain cases, but really depending on the project. But at the end of the day, like, 4-day work weeks versus 5-day work weeks, same kind of concept. When you notice that you have less time, you tend to be a bit more productive with your time. And my greatest example over here is like, I'm a new dad. So my kid is about 1.5 years old. And especially when his daycare was closed, I had a lot less time to work on my business. And I found that I was actually a lot more productive with the time that I did have, instead of like wasting my time on social media and things like that. Can I show the book recommendations again? Yes, definitely. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey, and Productivity Ninja by Graham Alcott. Are the tools free? So the project management tools that I showed, Trello, Asana, Basecamp, all of them are free. Toggle is free as well. Let me see if I have any of the paid ones in here. There are a whole bunch of other time tracking tools you can look for in this link. Pomodoro, obviously a physical tool. You don't really need an online tool for that, but there are online tools for that. Other tools I use, some of them which are paid. So for example, Zapier I use very heavily. Zapier is for automation. It helps tie different things together. So for example, if someone registers for an event on Eventbrite, I automatically add them to my mailing list as well. So that is done through Zapier. So it automatically takes the email of the person from Eventbrite and puts it into my MailChimp account. So some of these things I do pay for. Yep, Zapier is the word. MailChimp I pay for as well. You know, I'm paying for Zoom right now because the free version of Zoom doesn't allow me to do such a long presentation. So there are different tools. I pay for a lot of spreadsheet editing tools. So there's one called Power Tools. It allows you to clean up your database by removing duplicates. It allows you to quickly tidy up by, let's say if you have a list of names, it can capitalize the first letter of everyone's name. If you're trying to, let's say, find company names, it can help you remove suffixes or prefixes. Like for example, you might say like ABC Company Incorporated, and you want to remove the incorporated piece, then the tool can help you remove all of those kind of suffixes that come along as well. Yeah, those are some tools. I also pay for Google, so Google G Suite. Lindsay is saying I'm using MS Outlook Calendar to organize things and make sure of getting things done. So yeah, any calendar works. I use Google Calendar myself. Yeah. Tools to find people in business. Oh, my favorite would be LinkedIn plus Hunter.io. So I can quickly show you how powerful that can be. So let's say, for example, if you were looking for someone who worked at Spring, which was the company I used to work for, 2 ways you can do that. Number one is go to the company website, go to their team or about us page. Usually it's quite easy to find if it's a medium-sized or small-sized company, much harder if it's a large company. And then you can decide who you want to reach out to, because most of the team is usually listed on the website. So I might say, okay, if I'm looking at Daman, who is the director of operations, now I know a name for the role that I'm looking for. And then the next thing I'll do is I'll go on Hunter.io. There are other tools that are similar to Hunter.io. This tool is probably worth paying for if you do a lot of prospecting as well. And you just put in the website, and it will tell you what the emails are. So it will actually tell you pattern for this company is usually first name at spring.is. So in Daman's email is probably, it's not listed here, but it's Daman at spring.is or Daman at spring.is. So I can try and guess the email. Let's say, you know, this is Vanessa's email, this is Keith's email. So if you know their name, it's a lot easier to find. The second thing you can do is on LinkedIn, for example, is if you search the company, you can also see who works at the company. So usually more effective for larger companies where, you know, they might have a few thousand even employees as well. But I'll quickly show you. So I'm actually looking at theater. So let's say Thinkific, which is a Vancouver company as well. Thinkific, there we go. So when you look up the company, you can see on the bottom right, 130 employees. If I click on that, let's say I'm looking for the CTO. His name here, Matt Payne, CTO at Thinkific. So if I put Thinkific's website down in Hunter, I can probably guess his email. And what was it? Matt Payne. So the pattern over here is usually first name at thinkific.com as well. So I can try Matt at Thinkific. If that bounces, I can try maybe Matt.Payne. So you can try and guess emails as well. One thing you can do with guessing emails is there are email cleaning tools. So there's one I use called Bot Email Checker, and I also pay for this tool. What you can do is you can put in an email, or you can even import a list, a CSV file, and it will actually validate all the emails. And it will tell you if the emails are actually real emails or if it's an email that will bounce because it doesn't actually exist. So things like that help you clean up your list. Do I use CRMs? Definitely. HubSpot is one that I use for tracking emails. But really, you don't need to use a complicated tool for CRMs. You can even use it on a spreadsheet, Excel file, that works as well. Yeah. For email tracking, then you probably need a more robust tool, something like HubSpot or Pipedrive. They work very well. But if it's just really tracking like what customers, where the conversation is at, if it's super simple, you can get away with a spreadsheet. Any other questions? I think that is mostly it. But I will hang around in case there are more questions. I'm just asking, so what do I do? Yes, so right now I actually don't do entrepreneurship training anymore. So I used to work in Spring, which is, like I mentioned, a startup incubator accelerator. So I used to work very closely with startups and founders. So basically it's like consulting, like business consulting. So I work with them, I help them review their business ideas, help them brainstorm around how to go to market, how to build their products, how to build sales strategy, marketing strategy, build their teams, things like that. I don't do that anymore because I've left Spring, but I do still have some clients that I work with on the side. So if you're looking for that type of help, I'm happy to do that on the side. The main thing that I do with Classy Novel right now is I run this type of workshops. So they're basically focused on soft skill development and training. But the workshops, they're not my main product. What I plan to eventually start is this thing called the Novel Club. And the idea is it's a membership club where people get together and we help each other grow. It's very much like those accountability groups that I plan on doing. But the current accountability groups that I'm starting are really focused just on the aspect of building new habits and breaking in bad habits. So that's kind of what I'm focusing on the next 2 months. But the idea is I have a bigger plan for this membership where it's a year-long program where we go through different aspects of personal development, from things like relationship to improving our self-confidence, improving our health, improving our financial situations, our careers, things like that as well. Christine, is there any way that you would summarize all of these tools in one document? All in the slide. But I think all of the tools that I talked about, Tim Ferriss covers almost all of them, if not all of them, in his book For Our Work Week as well. Where am I located? I'm located in Burnaby or Vancouver, Canada. Yeah. The accountability groups that I'm doing right now, they are actually open to people from around the world. I already have about 30 people who have expressed interest, and that includes people from all the way from Vietnam to, I think, some folks in Madrid. I have people in, I think, even Brazil as well. So yeah, it doesn't matter where you are, as long as your time zone can work for you, then it should be fine, because they meet virtually. So I think that is it. I want to make sure that I don't eat up too much of the time. So we are about 15 minutes over. So that is pretty much the end of the presentation. So if you have to jump off, feel free to jump off. For our work week is definitely an old book. I don't know if there's a new edition. There are definitely new tools that are out there for sure. Yeah. I can try to definitely send a full list of all the different tools. So I'll try to compile the list and just send it, or maybe even put it into, I mentioned we have this collaborative notes document. So maybe I'll put all of the tools over there. Oh, it looks like no one really used it. I'll try to categorize them as well on this. I'm just going to work in this for a while, but if no other questions, feel free to jump off. Too much going on to jump into the document for sure. But yeah, feel free to dump stuff into the document after as well. What else do I use? Yes, I mean, definitely welcome that. So we'll connect on LinkedIn and we can discuss more. Building a website in e-commerce. E-commerce, definitely Shopify. Other website building, I personally really like WordPress, although there are pros and cons, of course. The nice thing about WordPress is it's fairly easy to use. The bad thing about WordPress is it's fairly vulnerable and has security issues and might be a bit slow. Not usually a big problem in most cases if you have a small company, but if you have a bigger company, it's not the best, of course. Yes, Google Sheet. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'll start here since I'm already in the document, but I can definitely move it over to Google Sheet. So many tools. What other tools do I use? All right, have a good night, everyone. All right, I think I will end the session and I will continue to kind of work in this doc and see what else I can come up with. And I'll also share, I'll turn it into a spreadsheet and share it with you all, so you all can definitely feel free to chip in and at whatever tools you have or you found work for you. All right, have a good night, everyone. Pleasure being able to facilitate and work with you all again.